This podcast is supported by the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of the nation's most powerful environmental defenders rooted in the South. Right now, we stand at a crossroads for our environment, and SELC is ready to tackle the challenges ahead. It's ready to hold the line on environmental protections and ready to ensure that people have the clean air, clean water, and healthy climate they deserve, and ready to stand up to powerful interests in the courtroom, the halls of government, and communities across the South. To learn more, visit southernenvironment.org.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
For more than a year, this case has been playing out that taps into fears that a lot of city dwellers carry with them. Fears about who's safe and what it takes to keep us that way. By the time this case got in front of a jury, it was known as the People v. Daniel Penny.
A jury has now been seated in the trial of Daniel Penny, the Marine veteran accused in the chokehold death of Jordan Neely on the subway last year.
It was May of 2023 when Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely's lives intersected on a Manhattan F train. Penny, an ex-Marine, put Neely, a mentally ill homeless man, in a chokehold. And Neely never got up.
Witnesses say Neely was acting erratically, threatening passengers. The Marine veteran claims he and other riders, quote, acted to protect themselves.
It took days for Penny to even be arrested for what happened. And how you saw what happened became a kind of test.
I think essentially where you fall on this case depends on what your vision of safety is and how you feel about, things like the mental health crisis in the city, the city's homeless population, how you feel when the mayor says that he's going to put more cops in the subways and sweep homeless encampments. Does that make you feel, quote unquote, safer, or does that make you feel concerned for a very vulnerable population of people?
Katie Way works for a news outlet called Hellgate, and she's been following along as prosecutors built their case and took it to a courtroom. There were actually two charges here, a manslaughter charge and a charge of criminally negligent homicide. And on Monday, a jury finally reached its verdict. Daniel Penny was found completely not guilty here. Like, no jail time, right?
Yes. Yeah, nothing.
Did that surprise you?
I wish I wasn't surprised. I don't know what that sort of says about me. Not to show my hand too much, but I definitely thought that it felt pretty obvious to me that Daniel Penny choked Jordan Neely to death.
I can understand what Katie's saying here, because as a New Yorker, even though I can empathize with the fear subway riders have about what goes on underground, what I can't get my head around is being okay with what sure looks like a public execution. Just after he was acquitted, Daniel Penny's lawyer went on the radio to talk about his case. There was this telling moment.
You and Daniel Penny's other attorney have said your client wasn't a hero, but that he acted when others were too afraid.
You can hear the way the interviewer is being a little deferential here, setting the attorney up as reasonable, modest. This is how the attorney responds.
He's a hero. I think it's clear that he is a hero, and what he did was heroic in putting his own life and his own safety aside to help other riders on that train. Because you got to remember, too, and this is to your point as to what effect will this have on New Yorkers moving forward. And I think that effect is it will encourage people that you could stand up for your fellow New Yorker and you could put your life in danger, and there will be people there that will stand up with you and defend you if for some reason you're blamed for anything that could go wrong as a result of your actions.
The message Daniel Penny's lawyers and supporters seem to want to transmit was that after this verdict, New Yorkers are safer. You're a New Yorker. Did you feel safer after this verdict came out?
No. No, definitely not. Yeah, in fact, it makes me feel a lot more afraid. I mean, especially with the hero rhetoric. Like, what is a hero? I don't want to see New Yorkers emulate what Daniel Penny did to Jordan Neely. That makes me very afraid.
Today on the show, we're going to walk through the evidence in this case and ask why it played out the way it did. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. We all know by now that Trump was elected president, and one thing is paramount. We must fight for our planet. The Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, is fighting in and out of court to protect the environment, public health, and climate progress from Trump's Project 2025 agenda. NRDC has done it before, and with your help, they'll do it again. During Trump's first term, NRDC filed over 150 lawsuits against Trump's administration and won almost 90% of resolved cases. And this time, they're ready to fight even harder. Despite Trump and his allies' best efforts to pull society backward again, NRDC will work every day to not let them stand in the way of progress. Your support is critical right now. NRDC is not giving up, and with you, they can safeguard our planet for future generations. Donate now at nrdc.org/podcast. All gifts matched for a limited time.
Can we tell listeners the story of Daniel Penny and how he ended up on a train with a guy named Jordan Neely, eventually putting him in a chokehold? The incident at the center of this trial, it happened in May 2023. What exactly went on here? What do we know?
Right. So what we know was that he was on his way to the gym. He got on the train at 2nd Avenue, and Jordan Neely got on the train at the same time as he did. Jordan Neely then began shouting threats at the passengers on the train. I think he threw his jacket on the ground, and witnesses did testify that they were afraid he was going to do something violent.
He talked about not being afraid to die, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not afraid to go to jail. I could go to jail for life. Yeah. So, I'm not, going to act like this is an amazing day on the train. I think that would be disingenuous. I'm not going to say I would feel perfectly fine and not nervous at all. But, upon hearing this, Daniel Penny told the NYPD he took out his earphones and then came up behind Jordan Neely and put his arm around his neck, just put him in a chokehold and brought him, down to the ground. The train then stops at Broadway Lafayette. This is an F train in the afternoon.
And we should say lots of people are filming at this point, right?
So people actually, there isn't video until after the train clears out. So the train enters Broadway Lafayette, stops, doors open, everyone gets off. Daniel Penny continues to hold Jordan Neely in the chokehold. 2 more men get on the train, try to take Neely's arms and restrain them. One of them testified, Eric Gonzalez, that he told Daniel Penny multiple times to let Jordan Neely out of the chokehold, that he had it under control. Daniel Penny did not let go. He held Jordan Neely in the chokehold for a total of around 6 minutes, including a final 51 seconds after Jordan Neely passed out. By the time he lets go, Jordan Neely is totally unconscious, not breathing. We saw in court body cam footage where Neely still has a pulse, but you can see his nose and mouth are not moving, and was eventually declared dead after the cops arrived.
Does anyone render Neely any aid, like CPR or anything like that?
So the police, they did sternum rubs after they arrived. But I think something that was pretty striking from some of that bystander cell phone video is that after, and again, body language isn't always a reliable indicator of, guilt or innocence. So I don't want to make too many connections, but, you see Daniel Penny stands up. Jordan Neely is limp on the ground, like flopping, clearly unresponsive. Penny leans over his body to pick up his baseball cap, brushes off his pants. Meanwhile, one of the other men holding Neely's arms, Eric Gonzalez, is trying to check Neely's pulse, is trying to turn him onto his side in a recovery position, which is what you're supposed to do after you hold someone in a chokehold and they pass out. And then another bystander came and tried to, I think, either pour some water on Jordan Neely to revive him or just do something to wake him up. And that's when Penny stepped in and started trying to get Jordan Neely into the recovery position. So, I mean, just those actions in the immediate aftermath of choking someone until they're unconscious, standing up and, not immediately checking in on that person is pretty striking.
This month's trial was all about Daniel Penny, the ex-Marine accused of killing Jordan Neely. But in the months since he died, we've actually learned a lot about who Neely was, too. Like a lot of homeless people in New York, he wasn't a stranger to trauma. His mother had been killed by her live-in boyfriend when he was just an adolescent, and Neely testified at the killer's trial. As a young adult, Neely's mental health deteriorated, and he used street drugs to cope. He became well known to the social workers who work in the subways, ending up on a citywide watch list for some of the hardest to reach New Yorkers. But Katie says Jordan Neely wasn't just a person in crisis. He was also known for something else, for dancing. For years, Neely made money as a Michael Jackson impersonator. And subway stations and train cars, they were his stage.
That's the kind of thing that, you see it on the subway, love it or hate it. It is a funny kind of, quirk of New York City. And it is, really sad to see someone going from doing something they really love, dancing, to music that they're clearly passionate about, to being in this clear, distinct moment of crisis and getting effectively killed for it.
So tell me a little bit about how the trial played out and how Daniel Penny's attorneys tried to get the jury to rethink the charges against him. My understanding is that Daniel Penny's defense team had two main threads of their argument. The first being that Daniel Penny acted in self-defense to protect himself and the other passengers on the train. Tell me about this legal argument and how they bolstered it.
Yeah, so a lot of that was very, very present, very foregrounded in the closing. I mean, they literally took the jury and everyone else in attendance through the quote unquote experience of being on the train using visuals of the F train and sound effects of the train braking and pulling out of the station and, language like, imagine you are on this train and this happens. Aren't you then happy that someone stands up and protects you? It was very deliberately trying to get everyone to identify, not even just with Daniel Penny, but with those people, like you said, that they were arguing that Penny, was supposed to protect. And they did other things to that effect, like discussing Neely's, previous criminal history, discussing other incidents that he'd had contact with law enforcement and had tested positive for drugs, for K2 specifically, just a combination of, here are all of the things that could make and did make Jordan Neely a threat. And then imagine if you were on that train, wouldn't you want Daniel Penny to be there?
It's interesting because a number of passengers who were on the train testified about their experience of that day, including another man who helped restrain Jordan Neely and acted pretty differently than Daniel Penny. So I guess I'm wondering, I know that the defense was trying to sort of set this scene of like, who, if you were on this train, how would you feel? But for the people who were actually on the train, what did they say? And how did that sort of inform maybe what the jury was hearing?
The people who were actually on the train when Neely was making the threats, both in the moment and afterwards, did testify that they were afraid, that they were worried that Neely had a weapon. So people did testify, like people who had kids on the train shielded those kids behind strollers, he was getting in people's faces, etc. And then after the train stopped and Penny continued to hold Neely in the chokehold, like I said, one person, Eric Gonzalez, who helped hold Neely's arms down while Penny was choking him, did testify that he told Penny multiple times, like, I've got him, you can let go. Another bystander, a homeless advocate named Johnny Grima, told the court that he was intimidated by Penny, that he was too afraid to, again, more forcefully tell Penny to let him go. So I think there is definitely kind of a clear switch over in what people in the moment might have been perceiving as the, deadly threat, if we want to call it that.
An argument that Penny's defense started focusing on towards the end of the trial was the idea that the chokehold Daniel Penny placed Jordan Neely in wasn't the sole cause of his death, that there was some combination of Jordan Neely's drug use and mental illness and sickle cell trait that contributed to his death. I've read a bit about how police have used sickle cell trait basically as an excuse when a Black man or a Black person dies in their custody. So I'm sort of curious, how did they spin this combination of factors, and how did New York City officials respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, like you said, they tried to say a combination of, being high on K2, psychosis, and then the sickle cell trait, which, like, to be super explicit, is not the same thing as like sickle cell disease, sickle cell anemia, anything like that. This is a trait that is present in 8 to 10% of Black Americans. This is not, a disease that Jordan Neely was suffering from. This is a genetic marker. They said a combination of those factors and the exertion from his altercation with Daniel Penny caused a sickling crisis that killed Jordan Neely. But yeah, the medical examiner who conducted Neely's autopsy was super, super clear. Asphyxiation, parentheses, chokehold, was what she chose to list as the cause of death. And the defense actually went after the ME's office in general, her boss, and said that, cast some aspersions about political aspirations the boss might have had, implied that pressure from protesters caused the ME to feel pressure to write down that the chokehold was the cause of death. It kind of got conspiratorial, which again, I found incredibly hard to buy. They also tried to say that, or they also said, I can't even say tried to say, because clearly on some level a successful argument, that Daniel Penny wasn't actually applying pressure. And you could see from, his arm looks so relaxed in this still of a video.
Wasn't there testimony from a martial arts instructor who basically said you learn as part of your training, you need to release someone in a chokehold once they're unconscious. And so Daniel Penny should have known that, even though he kept Jordan Neely in a chokehold after he was unconscious.
Yeah, there was testimony to that effect. And that is, to bring it back a little bit, what is interesting about the two different charges that Daniel Penny was facing, the first charge, second-degree manslaughter, the jury would have had to find that he knew that he was recklessly endangering Jordan Neely's life and did it anyway. And then the second remaining charge was that Daniel Penny should have known that the force he was using against Jordan Neely could have proven deadly. And even if he didn't, he should have known that he was recklessly endangering Neely's life. And so, yeah, in spite of that testimony, Penny was acquitted.
Did Daniel Penny ever express remorse for his actions?
Well, he did not testify. And in the interview that the NYPD conducted with him after, he was pulled off the train, and again, this was, before he was told that Jordan Neely was dead, at least in the clip entered into evidence in court, no, he doesn't ask how Jordan Neely is, and he doesn't say that he is sorry.
He refers to Jordan Neely as a crackhead a few times, right?
When he first got on, he kind of was throwing his stuff, doing what crackheads do, throw. And then he turned away from me.
You know how crackheads are. Just a crackhead,
But I was on my phone, listening to music. I wasn't paying attention. He's just a crackhead, you know what I mean? So when you say Diane,
very clearly has an idea of Jordan Neely as a type of person worthy at best of being ignored and clearly at worst of being choked to death on the floor of the F train.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. There is joy in finding the perfect gift for the ones you love, but it can be a challenge. Saks.com's holiday gift guide makes it easy. Whether you are surprising your hard-to-shop-for sister with a Chloe bracelet bag or gifting your partner a memorable scent from Gucci. At Saks.com, there is holiday inspiration for every personality on your list. If you go to their website, there is even a tab specifically for gifts where you can hunt for the perfect item for the pickiest shopper in your life, from Prada sneakers to Gucci lipstick. Saks.com's handpicked guide can help take the stress out of the holidays. And don't forget about yourself. You can add instant cheer to your home with some bright decor or bundle up in a scarf coat from Totem to stay warm all season long. Find gifts guaranteed to bring joy to everyone this holiday season at Saks.com. That is Saks.com for the ultimate holiday gift guide and all the shopping inspiration you need.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. We all know by now that Trump was elected president, and one thing is paramount. We must fight for our planet. The Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, is fighting in and out of court to protect the environment, public health, and climate progress from Trump's Project 2025 agenda. NRDC has done it before, and with your help, they'll do it again. During Trump's first term, NRDC filed over 150 lawsuits against Trump's administration and won almost 90% of resolved cases. And this time, they're ready to fight even harder. Despite Trump and his allies' best efforts to pull society backward again, NRDC will work every day to not let them stand in the way of progress. Your support is critical right now. NRDC is not giving up, and with you, they can safeguard our planet for future generations. Donate now at nrdc.org/podcast. All gifts matched for a limited time.
I want to get into the reaction to the verdict that we've seen just over the last day or two. I know that you spoke to this Queens City Council member, Vicky Palladino. You've talked about this a couple times. She was there to support Daniel Penny. I'm sort of curious, what did an elected official get out of going to this trial, showing up and speaking out in favor of this guy who contributed to the death of a man on the subway?
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the way that a lot of conservatives nationwide, even beyond just New York City, have taken up Daniel Penny's cause and put him in the same category as, like a Kyle Rittenhouse, like some kind of media darling. So, there's so much rhetoric, again, nationwide, not just New York City, although New York City gets a pretty bad rap, about how bad and horrible crime is in our cities. And if only we had enterprising young men like Daniel Penny to take care of it where our government fails.
It was interesting to me to see the New York City mayor, Eric Adams, kind of go back and forth on how he talked about Daniel Penny and what was going on. Like a week or two ago, he was on a radio show saying Daniel Penny was doing what we should have done as a city when it came to Jordan Neely.
Now, we're on the subway where we're hearing someone talking about hurting people, killing people. You have someone on that subway who was responding, doing what we should have done as a city and a state of having a mental health facility. Those passengers were
which is really, really hard to hear if you think the city's job is to take care of the people who live here. But it seems like after the verdict, he's moderated a little bit his tone. Do you think there will be more elected officials like this sort of finding their feet right now, given this acquittal?
I think the mayor is kind of the final word on this, because I think this really is maybe not a direct result, but I think a natural conclusion of the way that he's run New York City.
What do you mean when you say that, for people who aren't New Yorkers?
I mean, just running New York City in a way that is very explicitly pro-cop, pro-order. There's a lot of things scaring New Yorkers right now. Migrants, homeless people, drugs, mopeds, stuff like that. And the solution pretty routinely from the mayor has been to throw more law enforcement at the problem. And people are seeing, I think, things not really get better, not really get safer. And so after that, it makes sense to go a step further and do whatever you want to the people who are making you feel unsafe.
To me, it was hard not to see the way this acquittal happened on the same day that police found the guy who seems to have killed a healthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan. And the main thing I took from this was just vigilante violence seems to not be going away. I wonder if that's how you thought of it, too?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Penny and the suspected UHC assassin are the same age. These are both 26-year-old American white men who are stepping in with extrajudicial violence to solve what they perceive as a systemic failure. And that is not a good sign for society. That's how I'm thinking about it. That does not bode well.
Yeah. As I was getting ready for this interview, I was reading about vigilantism in the U.S. and how and why it surges. And this historian I was reading basically argued that vigilantes feel most empowered when who belongs to a particular community is up for debate. Like, the idea is that vigilantism is about trying to establish power, not reflecting pre-existing hierarchies. And I thought that was interesting. And it also just made me think a lot about what the last week told us about who's gaining power and who's losing it.
I think the real definition that was made of in-group versus out-group, or the attempt to stake that down from the Daniel Penny trial, is like, who's a New Yorker? Who gets to be a passenger on the train? Who gets to be a person? And I think the result of that ruling is that Daniel Penny is all of those things and Jordan Neely isn't. He doesn't count as any of those things. You know, he's not a person. He's not a New Yorker. He's not a passenger on the train. He's a criminal. He's a threat. You know, he's a homeless person, which is less than a regular person. It's not the same thing. They're not as deserving of protection, or, you know, he's a crackhead. And I think that is a very disturbing line in the sand to draw. And I think it has been drawn.
Katie, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Katie Way is a writer and editor at the website Hellgate. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky if you want. Say hello. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.